So I had to bring to you this article, ladies and gentlemen. In Real Clear Politics, Pastor Darrell Scott, Trump most pro-black president in my lifetime. And this is by an Ian Schwartz. And so you see CNN had a field day with this, of course, because of the long-standing history that African Americans and black people have dealt with in terms of systematic racism, anywhere from oppressive laws and government that really is in favor of people who don't really need help, but cuts funding for people who need help based on skin color, or based on how much money they make and don't make. And so Pastor Darrell Scott said that President Trump is the most pro-black president I've ever seen in my lifetime at a White House faith meeting on prison reform hosted by the president himself on Thursday. Scott appeared on Fox with Hannity to discuss his reason why he said this. So Sean Hannity is the host, and the president earlier tonight talking about how unemployment numbers for minorities to African American, Hispanic American, Asian, heard this out is some of those jobs are part-time jobs and they don't really pay good wages. That is why you have people working double shifts, triple shifts, or they have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Not very long ago, there was an article about a teacher in Florida who quit his job because he was only making $50,000, and now he makes double just being a shopper. And so, yeah, he's not African American, and he may not be in the Asian or Hispanic group, but there are black teachers, there are Hispanic teachers, and there are Asian teachers, and they don't make very much money. And so we've seen some of the developments with that. And then there are neighborhoods where people are working these low-wage jobs, and it doesn't pay the bills and the rent. It's just barely getting them by. And so these people apparently are far removed from those circumstances. So the article goes on to say that now and yesterday, a friend of the show, Pastor Darrell Scott, who also serves as a CEO of the National Diversity Coalition for the Trump CEO, had this to say about the president during the White House meeting with the inner city pastors. Let's just take a look. And so there's a clip up there. And so it actually will show how that meeting went. Well, at least it'll show how the CNN went. But I'm going to go in and read the rest of this because I want to switch over before. So Darrell Scott, founder and pastor, New Spirit Rival Church is what it's titled. To be honest, this is probably going to be, and I'm going to say this as the most pro-black president that we've ever had in our lifetime. Because, and I try to, analyze the people that I encounter. This president actually wants to prove something to our community. So our faith-based community and our ethnic community. The last president didn't feel like he had to. So he feels like he didn't have to. He got a pass. This president, this administration is probably going to be more proactive. We got urban revitalization and prison reform than any president in your lifetime. So Hannity goes on to say, and Pastor Darrell Scott joins us now along attorney Darrell Parks. All right, Darrell. Scott, hi. Hannity, the numbers are in. Simple question. Is an African American community, Hispanic community, women in the workforce, Asian Americans best? Are they doing better under the President Trump administration, or did they do better under 8 years of Obama's administration? So Scott responds, we don't know which Darrell you're talking to. Okay. Hannity, Darrell Scott. All right, I'm sorry. Darrell Parks' attorney. Well, Sean, what we want to see the president really address is the issues of historically Black colleges. And so, Hannity, no, I ask you a question. No issue, though. So, communities, are they doing better under Trump or Obama? So he's grilling him with the question. Parks, Sean, historically Black colleges are not doing better. Hannity, okay. Parks, still they need base. Hannity, how about Parks and not doing better? Hannity, unemployment and the economy, Trump or Obama, which one? Parks, that's what the president needs to address. But here's the challenge. What do President Trump doing? What is he doing to help the employment? Hannity, forget the challenge. You notice, Pastor Scott, Pastor, when you don't want to answer a question, that kind of means I put him in a corner called checkmate. I play chess. He can't Trump and not Obama. Pastor Scott. So Scott responds, listen, unemployment is at an all-time low. I lived through 12 different presidents and contemplating that fact. This president is the only one that I'm aware of, and I'm aware of the prison initiatives, the urban revitalization initiatives. He is focusing and concentrating on making a concerted effort to improve the quality of living for Black Americans. So I'm going to stop for a minute here. Did we or did we not see what happened in Florida with the Stand Your Ground incident? Did we or did we not see some of the other incidences? And it's a laundry list of incidences, all the way back to Trayvon Martin. The killings of Black people in this country, and not any of them have been really addressed by President Donald Trump. And so it goes on to say, and I haven't seen any other take a proactive stance to us Black Americans like this president is doing. Pastor Darrell Scott must really, really be under a fog or in a deep sleep, because he obviously is not seeing what all has been going on, because there's a lot of people who are in opposition to that statement that he made. And this title, that's his opinion. He's entitled to it, but that's not the collective of all Black Americans in the United States. That's not been our collective shared experience. Maybe he feels like this for him. Darrell Scott, Pastor Darrell Scott, maybe feel that he is a pro-President Donald Trump supporter, but not all Black Americans support this administration. So it goes on to say that Parks, well, let me say, I like, well, to think on the pro-Black issues. For example, this president has not appointed Black judges. Sean, and so that point alone shows me that the numbers as where he's appointed Black judges. Okay, so if you look at the administration, you don't see very many people of color. And as this person also has stated, Parks, you don't see any Black judges. I haven't seen one at all, really. And so correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I haven't seen very many. So I'll say that. So I don't really believe, and this is my opinion, that Donald Trump cares about Black people. I believe he is doing what he's doing because he's going to the Black neighborhoods and to the Black leaders that he feels are going to be most influential in persuading Black people to vote so he can be in office another 4 years. That's what I believe this whole thing is about. So it goes on to say that we got millions. This is Hannity speaking. We have disproportionately in the Obama years, when you look at the millions more in poverty food stamps out of the labor force. Not buying homes, the Black and Hispanic communities were disproportionately impacted. Now, the opposite has happened. Not necessarily true. But he goes on to say, you can't even say, good job, President Trump. It's good for everybody. What's good for everybody? Homeless has grown, and it's all over. It's all over in California areas and cities. There's a big homeless population in San Francisco. There's a lot of problems in these schools. There's school shootings that are up. There's gun violence. We just had killings in Chicago with guns that they so claim they're going to be strict about making laws to end gun violence, when gun violence actually has risen since they made the big speech about the Parkland, Florida students who had that fatal incident that happened. And they had that march called the March of Our Lives. Seems like gun violence has skyrocketed. And now we have a problem where they have printed 3D gun parts online and assemble the parts into a real gun. We also had police officers who were actually selling guns online because they make big money by doing it. And who were they selling the guns to? You know who's going to buy those guns? Criminals and people who are in devices and underworld crime. And so these are the people that will go buy these gun parts because to go into a gun shop because of these gun laws, because no real smart criminal will go into a gun shop to buy a gun at all. So Parks goes on to say, good job, President Trump. But we have our issues. We have other issues. So Hannity, I wish you voted for President Trump now. Parks, he says, no. I want to see President Trump put more Blacks in his administration, which he hasn't, and he probably won't. And when he does, he'll find something wrong so that they won't be there very long. There are white people that were in his administration, and I say over maybe, I'll give a rough estimate, maybe more than almost 40 have left. A couple of them wrote books. explaining some of the conspiracies that have gone on in that administration. Hannity, Pastor Parks, we don't see black faces in his administration, which is true. You only see white men making decisions, making laws, and they don't address the black community unless they want votes. And the Democrats have also done this too. So let's be mindful of that. They're one and the same. And that's what's been happening. It's tit for tat. Scott, but listen, Attorney Parks, listen. When people ask me, why aren't more blacks in the administration? I ask them, where were those blacks during the campaign? Us blacks that were with him during the campaign were vilified and ostracized, called Uncle Tom and cahoots, coons, sellouts, and everything else. So are we revealing something about this Pastor Darrell Scott? Sounds like he is a Trump supporter and he's a Republican. And he's leaning more towards that arena. So this may be his position on his approach to his situations, is he's thinking that he's a free thinker and that he's free to be who he wants to be, even if it means that it could be very detrimental to the black community and the people that he is supposed to be over in his congregation. So all of a sudden you got black people, he goes on to say, that were told to stay away from Trump during the campaign. Now you're saying, where are the black people he's supposed to have? Where were they and have been? Okay. So Parks. But Pastor Scott, he could still appoint black people to his cabinet. There's no reason that blacks should not be appropriately represented in the U.S. government. It's only right. Hannity, all right, we're going to. Yeah, but the people they're going to pick are going to be people like Pastor Darrell Scott, who feel like President Trump is the blackest and pro-blackest president there is. And we shall see about that in a few minutes. So we need more than one. This is coming from Parks. You realize, Pastor Scott let me preach inaudible at his church? It was the worst moment. I did terrible. All right. Thank you both. And this was Hannity. Okay, so this was about Pastor Darrell Scott, President Donald Trump, and Hannity under Real Clear Topics. Now, most recently, there was an article saying that they prayed for President Donald Trump because of jungle. They quoted jungle journalism. A lot of the journalism that has been put out, if it's anything that is contrary or anything that has to do with opening up Pandora's box of this administration, somehow it's false. Somehow it's fake news. Somehow it's not relevant, or it's not important, or it doesn't apply to what's going on, or it's seen or viewed as a threat when people view this president in a negative light. A lot of people know this president before he became an actual president, Donald Trump. So I'm going to flip over here. For those people who have short memories, under the New York Times, why Donald Trump Double Central Part 5 by Sarah Burns, October 17, 2016. Donald J. Trump rarely apologizes. When it comes to the chase of the Central Park 5, he has never even come close to it. In 1989, after these Black Latino teenagers from Harlem were accused of assaulting and raping a white woman in the Central Park, Mr. Trump spent $85,000. $85,000 placing a full page ad in the 4 daily papers in New York City calling for the return of the death penalty. He wanted them out of here, executed, gone, vanished. Muggers and murderers. Does that sound familiar? This was coming from Donald Trump. This is what he wrote. And he had his own little fake news back then. He paid to have those ads put out about those teenagers. Says muggers and murderers. He wrote, they should be forced to suffer, and when they kill, they should be executed for their crimes. Though he didn't refer to the teenagers by name, but it was clear to anyone in the city that he was referring to them. Incredibly, 14 years after their sentences were vacated based on DNA evidence and the detailed and accurate confession of the serial rapist named Martius Reyes, Mr. Trump has doubled down. They admitted that they were guilty. And he said in a statement to CNN this month, the police doing the original investigation say that they were guilty. The fact that the case was settled with so much evidence against them is outrageous. Mr. Trump is apparently ignorant of our country's epidemic of wrongful convictions, which disproportionately also affects minorities, and the prevalence of false confessions in those convictions. Here are the young men who were accused of these crimes. Antron McRae, Raymond Santana, Kevin Richardson, Yusef Salaam, Corey Wise in New York City, known as the Central Park Five. They served prison sentences after being wrongfully convicted in the Central Park jogger case. He isn't alone. There has been a president drumbeat since the sentences were vacated that the Central Park Five were guilty either of rape or of some other crime that night. A 2003 New York Police Department review reached the conclusion that the boys were likely guilty of the initial assault on the jogger, even if they didn't commit the rape. Linda Farstein, who oversaw the sex crime unit in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office at the time, maintains that the jury reached the correct verdict. Online, the case as the Central Park Five has become a meme about liberal disgrace or disregard for law, the order, and order, or as conservative columnists and Coulter argue, liberals are opposed to rape in the abstract. But when it comes to actual rapists, they're all for them. Why the continued belief in the guilt of the Central Park Five, despite all the evidence to the contrary? Race and racism surely play their role. So does the cognitive trap that psychologists call anchoring and what we call first impressions. So Mr. Trump quickly jumped to the conclusions about their guilt, as did many in the New York City. So Mr. Trump pointed out 4 of the 5 teenagers did confess to being at the scene of the rape. But false confessions are surprisingly common in criminal cases. So in the hundreds of post-conviction DNA exonerations that the Innocence Project has studied, at least 1 in 4 of the wrongfully convicted had given a confession. So in the case of the Central Park attack, the confessions were the only real evidence. The DNA testing, a nascent technology of 1989, was used to compare a single sample found on a victim with the profile of not only the Central Park Five, but also of many of the other kids they had been with in the park. They were no matches. There were no matches. The victim, when she awoke from a coma, had no memory of the attack. That left only the statements from the four of the teenagers, Raymond Santana, Kevin Richardson, and Corey Wise, and Antron McQuay. The fifth, Yusef Salam, might have confessed, but his mother and interrupted the interrogation process before she signed anything. A detective was nonetheless allowed to testify that Mr. Salam had admitted to participating, though he'd given no formal statement. From the relative comfort of the jury box or Trump Tower, it may be hard to imagine why anyone would admit to a crime he didn't even commit. So the power imbalance in the interrogation room is extreme, especially when the suspects are young teenagers, afraid of the police and unfamiliar with the justice system or their rights. The teenagers face 4 hours of intense interrogations with no lawyers present, and often with no parent or guardian present, even though they were just 14, 15, and 16 years of age during this time. They were denied food, drink, and sleep over many hours, and they were extremely terrified. The young men were all led to believe that they would be allowed to go home only if they said what the police wanted them to hear. So the four who gave the statements admitted to having been present, but blamed others for the rape, which they naively thought would not incriminate them. The confession were riddled with problems, as the district's attorney often later found that the statements differed from one and the other on the specific details of virtually every major aspect of the crime. Who initiated the attack, who knocked the victim down, and who undressed her, who struck her, and who held her, who raped her, and what weapons were used in the course of the assault, and when in the sequence of the events the attack took place. Mr. Trump has also suggested that the teenagers were guilty of something that night because he wrote in an editorial for the New York Daily News in 2014, "These young men do not exactly have the past of angels. None of the Central Park Five have ever been arrested before, so Mr. Trump's reference to their past has no basis in truth." So the five were in the park that night, but they maintained that they did not participate in other attacks and that there's no evidence that they did. So we are left with Mr. Trump's presumption that because they were Black and they were brown teenagers in Harlem, that they must have committed the crimes. So the idea that the teenagers who were in the park while crimes were being committed by others deserved to be labeled as rapists and sent to prison for between 8 to 13 years is an affront to our Constitution. Mr. Trump owes many people overdue apologies. At the top of his growing list should be Mr. McCrae, Mr. Wise, Mr. Salam, Mr. Santana, and Mr. Richardson. They were victims of a rush to judgment 27 years ago. They shouldn't still be. Okay, so there was a correction in this article. October 17, 2016, earlier version of the article misidentified the role of Linda Farstein in the criminal's trial as the Central Park Five. Ms. Farstein was the supervisor of the sex crimes unit in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. She was not the prosecutor. Okay, so this is an article that clearly talks about how Donald Trump feels about Black and brown people. And it doesn't matter what community this happened to be, the Harlem community. But this can be any community. Any Black and Hispanic community, this is how he really feels about you. So will we call this same man who spent 85,000 placing a full page ad in the four daily ads in the four daily papers of the New York City, calling for the death and the execution of Black and brown teenagers based on something that they don't even realize whether it happened or it didn't happen? They didn't have really any evidence, not enough to incriminate these people, but they were already criminalized verbally. They were publicly lynched by this $85,000 ad that Donald Trump put out on their heads. Here they are. Never received an apology for what was done to them. But, however, we have Pastor Darrell Scott, who feels that Donald Trump is the blackest and the most pro-Black president in his lifetime. Thoughts and your feedback on that? Thanks for listening.
I'm going to say it over and over because I'm really proud of it. Remember, I said, what do you have to lose? What do you have to lose? African Americans, so many others. I said, what do you have to lose? You have high crime rates. You have horrible education. You have this. I went through a list of 10. That's what happened. African American, Hispanic, Asian. You have the lowest level of unemployment in the history of our country. How does somebody fight that, right? How does somebody fight that?
The president earlier tonight talking about how unemployment numbers for minorities, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans are vets. And 14 states, all record lows. Now, and yesterday, a friend of the show, our friend Pastor Darrell Scott, who also serves as the CEO of the National Diversity Coalition for the Trump CEO, had this to say about the president during a White House meeting with inner city pastors. Take a look.
To be honest, this is probably going to be and I'm going to say this at this table, the most pro-Black president that we've had in our lifetime, because, and I try to, analyze the people that I encounter. This president actually wants to prove something to our community, our faith-based community and our ethnic community. The last president didn't feel like he had to. He felt like he didn't have to. He got a pass. This president this administration is probably going to be more proactive regarding urban revitalization and prison reform than any president in your lifetime.
And Pastor Darrell Scott joins us now, along with attorney Darrell Parks. All right, Darrell, the numbers are in. Simple question. Is the African American community, Hispanic community, women in the workforce, Asian Americans, vets, are they doing better under President Trump, or did they do better under 8 years of Obama?
We don't know which Darrell you're talking about.
All right, I'm sorry.
Well, Sean, what we want to see the president really address
I asked you a specific question. No diversion.
Well, I'm talking to the education issue, though.
Is the African American community and all these minority communities, are they doing better under Trump or Obama?
Sean, historically Black colleges are not doing better. Students who need need-based financial aid are not doing better.
Unemployment in the economy, Trump or Obama?
But here's the challenge. What actually did President Trump do to help unemployment?
Pastor, when you don't want to answer a question, that kind of means I put him in a corner called checkmate. I play chess. He can't answer this question because he knows the answer is Trump. It's not Obama, Pastor Scott.
Listen, unemployment is at an all-time low. I've lived through 12 different presidents, and in contemplating that fact, this president is the only one that I'm aware of, and I'm aware of the prison initiative, the urban revitalization initiative. He's focusing and concentrating on making a concerted effort to improve the quality of living for Black America. So it's easy for me to say what I said on yesterday because, you know, I lived through a lot of different presidents, and I haven't seen any of them take a proactive stance towards Black America like this president is doing.
Darrell Scott. I'm sorry, Darrell Marks.
Well, let me say this. I think on the pro-Black issue, for example, this president is not appointing Black judges, Sean. And so that point alone, show me the numbers as to where he's appointing Black judges in the federal bench.
We had disproportionately in the Obama years, when you look at the millions more in poverty, food stamps, out of the labor force, not buying homes, the Black and Hispanic community were disproportionately impacted. Now the opposite has happened, and you can't even say, good job, President Trump. It's good for everybody.
Good job, President Trump, but we have other issues.
So we should vote for President Trump.
Sure. No, but I want to see President Trump put more blacks in his administration. We don't see black faces in his administration.
Pastor.
But listen, Brother Parks, listen. When people ask me why aren't there more blacks in the administration, I ask them where were those blacks during the campaign? Us blacks that worked with him during the campaign were vilified, ostracized, called Uncle Tom's, cool sellouts, and everything else. Now all of a sudden you got black people that were told to stay away from Trump during the campaign. Now you're saying, well, where's all the black people he's supposed to have? Where were they at there?
But Pastor Scott, he can still appoint black people to his cabinet. There's no reason that blacks should not be appropriately represented in the U.S. government.